Okay, I added this to the last lecture, but I'll just go over it real quick. So, Darwin's second great idea was descent from a common ancestor. And so it has a lot of consequences, but first of all, let's kind of go over it. The Okay. This is not your family tree, but this is on the bottom here. So at each node, we have all these great-grandparents and second cousins. In other words, to get back to your second cousins, you have to go back to where your great-grandparents are. And then similarly, all the way up to where we are with your parents and your siblings and yourself. The same thing happens here with a common ancestor. So this is the most recent common ancestor for all vertebrates. If we actually look in the fossil record, we see the first indication of vertebrates, almost 500 million years ago. And then, if you remember this kind of tree, this is called a phylogenetic tree, and it shows ancestor-descendant relationships. And so, if we actually go from the bottom to the top, that's time. So this is old and new. Okay, and at a certain point, the first tetrapods evolved. There's transitional forms. We'll look at those later. First amphibians, and then eventually we ended up with reptiles, mammals, dinosaurs, which are mostly extinct, and birds, which are not extinct, but they're dinosaurs as well. So I just want you to understand what ancestor-descendant relationships have to do with each other. And so each of these things, actually, like this is the vertebral column, okay? That was the first thing that actually evolved. Before that, there's something called chordates. They don't necessarily all have vertebral columns, but all vertebrates are chordates. But then we can see tetrapods. That means limb development. Common ancestor of mammals, so mammary glands and hair. And then there are primates as well, which is one of the larger groups of mammals, and they evolved around 55 million years ago. Mammals actually first showed up on the scene. They're the first, I guess, kind of mammal-like reptiles were probably in the Triassic 200 million years ago. So, we know that family members resemble each other because of inheriting the same alleles as their parents had, and their grandparents had, and their great-grandparents had. You're descended, or you're related to your parents by 50%. You're related to your siblings, full sibs, by 50%, half sibs, 25%. Your grandparents, 25%. Your cousins, first cousins, 1/8. Just so you get an idea of what happens over time. And the same thing happens in terms of why do certain organisms resemble each other. Well, they resemble each other because they descended from ancestors that had those traits. So they inherited those genes and those traits from their ancestors. So all this group, they all have a vertebral column, every single one of them. So they're all included in the vertebrates. And then there's only some that are actually four-legged vertebrates, and the fishes, of course, aren't, and so on. So if you go older or newer into time, you, of course, still have inherited those original traits, but you've also gotten newly derived traits. And then this is kind of like predictions about what you would make because of these things from common ancestry. So, of course, you'd expect, now, the fossil record is very, very incomplete, and it's mainly because it's difficult, first of all, to make fossils. And then, eventually, all the sedimentary rock is subducted into the Earth's mantle where fossils are destroyed. So there's only certain fossils that you usually find, usually hard fossils like bones or shells or something, but there are certain soft-bodied fossils that have been found as well. There's something called homology. This is an important thing that we'll go over, but these are traits that individuals have inherited from a common ancestor. Like all vertebrates have a vertebral column. That's a homology. All tetrapods, four-legged vertebrates on land, have four limbs, except where they've been lost. And so snakes have lost limbs. Some lizards have actually lost limbs. They look like snakes. The snakes, though, actually have what's called a vestigial trait. That means if you look at their skeletal remains, they still have hips and the remains of legs, because their ancestors used to have legs, and they were then selected against. Okay? So you can look back on that. If you see something that looks like a vertebrate, but you feel like, well, it's a terrestrial thing, so it should have legs, why doesn't it? You can predict, it's called a retrodiction, that, oh, there should be some remnants of those legs that were once there. Okay? We'll go through embryology as well in terms of shared developmental pathways, and then descent from common ancestry affects how lineages evolve through time. And this, for example, bad design. There are a lot of things about most living organisms that an engineer would not design that way. So why isn't it well designed? Well, evolution only works with what it has, and it inherits all these other traits that might not be useful anymore. So it has to do workarounds. And then there's transitional taxa, kind of like missing links, lots of those. Like there's tetrapod ancestors that are fish-like, but they seem to be developing limb buds as well. So they probably originated in estuaries and shallow water. The first ones probably might have waddled up on the land for a little bit, but for not much. And then finally, new species formation. So these are all predictions that you would expect from evolutionary theory, including biogeography. So we'll go on. Now, this is a phylogeny again. As you can see, first of all, timeline, oldest and youngest, okay? But it's going up at a thing like that. And you can see different groups. So here we have a lungfish, which is the most closely related fish or group of fish that actually exist to all the all the tetrapods. It's got a kind of a proto-lung, so it can survive on land for a certain amount of time. It's got this proto-lung because it lives in very shallow water and ponds and stuff that dry up. And during the dry season, where it exists, it actually has to move from one pond to another. And then we can see the tetrapods. So this is this group right here. In other words, all these individuals have 4 limbs. The first ones that evolved were amphibians. And a number of different groups includes salamanders, frogs, caecilians, among other things. And so here's limbs, right, where limbs first evolved. Now, the amniotic egg is only shared among reptiles, mammals, crocodiles, and birds. Okay? Not the amphibians. So we would expect, in terms of the fossil record, would you expect to see amphibians first, or would you expect to see reptiles first in the fossil record? Anybody? What do you think? Yeah, you do. You're going to make a guess. Amphibians. Now, where is amphibians? Frogs and salamanders. Is that older or younger? Yes. This is old, this is young, right? So this is more recent, this is older. Okay. If it's older, then that's where you'd expect to find it in the fossil record, earlier. Okay? If you found, let's say, a bird 400 million years ago in the Devonian, there would be a problem. That would put a real dink in evolutionary theory, because evolutionary theory predicts that certain traits evolved at certain times, and that if you actually had an organism that showed up with those traits earlier than it first evolved, that would be a problem, right? So birds have a whole bunch of things like feathers. They're warm-blooded. They have beaks that, like older things like salamanders, do not have. Okay, so they showed up 400 million years ago when salamanders first showed up. You'd say, well, Darwin's got a problem. Okay. So when we say this is a phylogenetic tree, it shows ancestor-descendant relationships. In other words, descent from common ancestors, and that descent shows up in traits that are common to those ancestors and all their descendants. And we might represent it, in this case, with a phylogenetic tree that goes through time. I thought I was. Oh, God. Okay. Damn. Okay, anyway, I'll go over it. I've already recorded that part, so let's see. Oh, I see. Okay, I got it. Okay, good. Now I'm recording, so we'll go over it again. So, in this case, oldest, youngest, The ancestor was, of all vertebrates was back here, about 500 million years ago in the fossil record. The first fishes, well, the first jawless vertebrates, they didn't have jaws, but they were the ancestors of all subsequent vertebrates, including the jawed individuals. So jaws, the evolution of jaws was a big deal. And then there's a whole group of different kinds of fishes, including extinct fishes like the placoderms, that went extinct by 400 million years ago. And then sharks and rays showed up. And then from there, a population split off and evolved into bony fish. And a whole bunch, that's where most of the fish are today that we found. Okay. And then, of course, we have right here, you've got the ancestor of, actually it's right here, the ancestor of all tetrapods. And then reptiles, and the first group that we look at, the first reptiles were mostly lizards and snakes, kind of like things. There's a few remnants or taxa that's still around, like the tuatara from New Zealand, that looks like a lizard, but it's not like modern lizards, actually. It's a much older taxa. And then the reptiles further split, including turtles and tortoises, mammals, then split off, crocodiles, and birds and dinosaurs split off. Dinosaurs went extinct, and there's still birds around, which are dinosaurs. Most of the other dinosaurs went extinct as well. Okay. This is kind of a hard concept to look at, but let's take a look at it anyway. Okay, first of all, okay, so here's the fossil record, and this is the most recent up here, and this is the oldest down here. And during the Ordovician, the jawless fishes first show up in the fossil record. Okay? The placoderms show up, in the Silurian, just after the Devonian, the Ordovician and before the Devonian. The first cartilage fishes, like sharks and rays, they show up in the Devonian. And we're not sure, there's a lot of uncertainty here. Bony fishes, we're not sure exactly when they showed up. And also, later in the Devonian, the amphibians start to show up. And it's not until, the reptiles just before the Permian that reptiles show up. And then much later during the Triassic, birds, and before that is the mammals. Okay? Now, let's take a look at this. Now, this is why are traits nested within a hierarchical pattern. And what I mean by this is that older taxa have ancestral traits. Newer taxa have more recent traits. Okay? And so that's why birds, we'll say, are the most recent. Birds are the most recent. They have feathers, they have bills, a number of other specific features that no other groups have. But within but they are amniotes. Okay? These are amniotes. And amniotes include all reptiles, birds, and mammals. Tetrapods, all amniotes are tetrapods. Okay? So tetrapods are ancestral to the amniotes which showed up later, or more recently, rather. Okay? So that means 4 limbs, amniotic eggs, feathers. And we can do the same thing here in terms of what the pattern looks like. All of these have backbones. Only some of these, including amphibians, have 4 legs. Of those, only some have amniotic eggs. Including reptiles. And then mammals also have amniotic eggs, but they also have fur. So there's actually another area here where there's something that mammals have that no one else has. And then feathers. Mammals don't have feathers, but birds do, and dinosaurs actually do too. So there's this nested pattern of like those Russian dolls. You have a big Russian doll, and inside is a smaller Russian doll, and inside is a smaller Russian doll, until finally there's this tiny little Russian doll. The same thing is happening in terms of phylogenies that show the phylogenetic record about when things and when certain traits evolved. So, for example, which taxa up here has a backbone? Do fish have backbones? Do amphibians have backbones? Do mammals have backbones? Do birds have backbones? Which one? All of them, exactly. Hold on. Okay. Which trait first appeared in the fossil record? Feathers, 4 limbs, backbone, or amniotic egg? Backbone. Good. Which trait most recently appeared in the fossil record? Feathers, 4 limbs, backbone, amniotic egg? Feathers. Good. Okay. Okay, so now we're with homology. These are traits that are inherited from a common ancestor. Okay? Now, these are all limb bones of tetrapods. And their limbs all have the same bones. They have a humerus. They have the ulnus and radius, right? They have the metacarpals. And they have the phalanges. Okay? And even though they look, a lot of these things look very different from each other, like the phalanges of a bat look much different than the phalanges of a seal or a human. Okay? Because there's been evolution going on by natural selection because of the kind of style that these different organisms lead, the kind of life they lead, and the things they have certain traits that help them survive and reproduce in the environment that they're in. Okay? So these all show, these are all homologous characters. They may look different, but they're the same bones, all inherited from a common ancestor that had these sorts of things. Even right here, there's whales and dolphins. Now you think, well, whales and dolphins don't have the same arm and leg bones, right? Well, they don't, but they had ancestors that did, and we can see that in their skeletal remains because there's actually vestigial traits like little tiny legs and arms, or the remnants of a hip bones that used to be there but aren't anymore. Okay. Now, in terms of development, so this is embryology, and this is what a vertebrate embryo looks like. This area, those are all gill slits. Okay? Fish, of course, have gills. They all have tails, every single one of them. But let's see, this reptile, gills show up and then go away as it's developing. The same thing with birds and with mammals, humans. So if you look at an embryo at a certain time of development, you'll see gill slits in human embryos. They then go away. In the fish, we don't see that. They show up and they stay there. Okay. Now, this is the okay. This is the circulatory systems of a shark, of and a human baby at 29, 49, and 56 days. Okay? And we can see that all of these different major blood vessels find corresponding ones in the human, including some other ones that evolved later. Okay. And then finally, okay, in the same way, we actually look at alleles. So, these are there are four base pairs that make up genes, G, C, T, and A. Okay, so we can actually see this in the fossil record. I mean, in our record, species A has GG, close relative GG, distant relative GG, and then there's an A in the close relative and a distant relative, but it changed from original, or the species A is changed to a T. And then here, the distant relative had a G. It then changed to a T. And then here, an A. And this one, a C that changed to a C, that kept the C, and then now has changed into a new base pair, an A. Come on. That means when they have these different bases, that means there's been a change to the protein that is coded for. And all these different traits are based on the coding. So genes don't actually code for traits. They code for certain proteins that affect all sorts of different things. Eventually, they affect what a trait looks like. Sometimes a trait is due only to a single base pair substitution, whereas most cases it's usually a number of different changes in the base pairs. But you can see that the distant relative shows 5 different changes out of 30 of these alleles. This group has 3 out of 30, that's 10%. And then species A, which is the most recent, if we're looking going back in time. So in terms of what you would expect in terms of our genes is that more closely related species would have fewer changes. Like the close relative to species A and the species A, there's only 3 base pair differences there. The more distant relative, there was an extra couple of changes in the more distant past. Okay, now it's incorrect to say that humans evolved from monkeys. Okay. Rather, monkeys and the great apes, including humans, evolved from a common primate ancestor that lived around 30 million years ago. Okay? So, these are older primates. Beginning here, we see the great apes. The great apes have lost a tail. None of the great apes have a tail, including orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and ourselves. Okay? So, at a certain point, no tail, more erect posture, larger brain than let's say your monkeys. Now, in the great apes, including the gorillas, you have reduced hairiness, elongated skull, enlarged brown ridges, shorter canine teeth. In chimpanzees, bonobos, you also have broad incisors, delayed sexual maturity, increased size of the genital structures. Okay, and then finally up here we have loss of hair, among other things, and so that's loss of hair, or most of the hair, and also bipedal locomotion. That means on 2 legs. So all these other apes are knuckle walkers to a certain point. Okay? But humans are not. Humans actually walk upright. Now, there's something interesting here. Okay. Humans, we have 23 pairs of what are called homologous chromosomes. A homologous chromosome means that we're diploid, okay? Well, everything in here is diploid, but it means that we actually have 46 chromosomes. We have 23 pairs, one in each pair there's one from mom, one from dad, okay? That's why there's 46 total. Now, the thing that's kind of strange is that all the other great apes have 24 pairs, or 48 homologous chromosomes. That means humans, or the human lineage, lost a pair of chromosomes. Now, there's two possibilities here about why humans have 23 instead of 24. One hypothesis, a whole chromosome was lost. What's another way that you can actually end up with 23 pairs of chromosomes instead of 24? Anybody?
Mutation.
Huh?
Mutation.
Well, it's certainly going to be a mutation. But why do humans have 20? How might humans also have 23 chromosomes instead of 24? What if you stick two chromosomes together? You have one less chromosome. You now have a longer chromosome. Well, that's the prediction here. One human chromosome should have homologous genes from two ape chromosomes. That's exactly what we have. We have this, there were two ape chromosomes, which were ape 12 and 13, that ended up getting stuck together into the human chromosome number 2. Now, we know this for a number of reasons. First of all, okay, each chromosome pair has this, what's called a centromere, okay? Right here. And it turns out, now, on the apes, there were two different chromosomes, and there were these centromeres here, and then telomeres at the ends, okay? The humans actually have two areas where there's centromeres. There's an old centromere, which were old centromeres from the apes, and the new centromere, which were actually telomeres from the two ape chromosomes. Okay, so what happened is, when the lineage or the population that split off that led to humans, there was a major mutation in the chromosomes where two ape chromosomes fused together and formed one human chromosome. That used to be two chromosomes. Now, an engineer would never have done this. Okay? Never. But this is what we actually see. Okay. Now, I was talking about homology. So homology are shared traits inherited from common ancestors. Okay? Analogy or analogous traits are traits that look like they might be inherited from a common ancestor, but aren't. They're actually newly derived traits. Okay, so this is a good example. These two birds they're all shorebirds on the left, and they both have long legs. Okay? The ancestor was right here, the common ancestor, and before that, these were all short-legged birds, but right here we had a new evolutionary form, a new taxa, that then subsequently split into two different species, but they both inherited from their common ancestor long legs. In other words, long legs are actually, they reveal ancestral descendant relationships. Now, on the other side, though, we've got everybody else has here is short tail, right? Except for these two taxa. They both have long tails. You can think, well, why aren't we creating a phylogenetic tree? Okay. Well, it turns out that, first of all, we can look at the genes, and we can actually see probably that these two birds with long tails actually don't share as many genes as this taxa and this taxa versus this taxa and then this taxa. Okay? So the genes tell us something different than the actual tail does. Now, why does the bird have, these two birds have different length, have longer tail? Well, they probably live in an environment where perhaps having a longer tail is more beneficial. The forest structure might be different. Or both birds might use long tails as a sexually selected characteristic where the males use it to actually display to the females. Okay? So it looks like they might have shared it because of a common ancestor. They actually shared it because it originated for the same purpose and for the same reasons, but independently. So that means analogy. This is analogy. Homology. Okay? So there's a difference. In fact, in this case, you'd say the long tails are actually misleading in terms of the relationships between different species. Now, when you see this kind of thing where there's shared traits but not because of common ancestry, it's due to what's called convergence or convergent evolution. Okay? Convergent evolution, similar traits but not due to common ancestry. And the result, it's due to anything other than descent from a common ancestor, and the result of similar selection or selective pressures in similar environments. Like this. Okay, where the two long-tailed ones are here. Okay, these are long tails, and everything else up here is short tails. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so here we are again. Which is homology and which is convergence? Okay, on the top here, we've got a dolphin, and we've got an ichthyosaur. Ichthyosaurs are reptiles, extinct ones, and dolphins are mammals. They look like they have similar body forms. Why would they have this kind of body form, can you think of? Where do they both live? In water, okay. So having a body like that makes them more hydrodynamic. They move through water easier and more efficiently. Now, it turns out if we actually look at the phylogenetic tree for this group, we see that this is the ancestor of all the mammals, including, these are synapsid reptiles that show mammal-like characteristics, and then the three major groups of mammals, marsupials, monotremes, and placentals. Okay? Now this is the common ancestor for both groups. The ichthyosaur is actually part of this reptilian group that includes birds, dinosaurs, lizards, and snakes. Okay? And all these other ones didn't have this body shape. So in this case, it looks like, because this ichthyosaur is more similar actually to a reptile than to a mammal, this body form evolved independently for each group. So dolphins, of course, come from an ancestor that had 4 legs. Ichthyosaurs come from an ancestor that had 4 legs and then evolved as the lineage evolved into a group that became living in water. Okay? And if we actually look at dolphins, we can see through time that that group came from a group of animals that are closely related to, like, let's see, artiodactyls, like horses and deer and things like that. And the same thing with ichthyosaurs. Okay? So, in this case, now, if we go back down here, though, these are what are called Hox genes. And Hox genes are major gene controllers of other genes that that kind of control development. Now, all animals have Hox genes. Okay? If we look up here and we look at fruit flies, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Hox genes. If we actually look, now these Hox genes are identical between a fruit fly and a human. Okay? But the human Hox gene has an additional 1, 2, 3, 4 new Hox genes. Okay? So we actually know that fruit flies, or the ancestors of insects, showed up way before humans did. So humans are derived. But they inherited all these other Hox genes from a common ancestor with fruit flies. That means you're related to fruit flies. It's the way it is, okay? You're also related to bacteria. Bacteria don't have Hox genes. Hox genes didn't show up until animals first evolved. Okay? There's some early animals, like jellyfish, that only have like 2 or 3 Hox genes. Those were the ancestral Hox genes. Okay? So in this case, which group has homologous characteristics or homologous genes? This group, the fruit flies and the humans with the Hox genes, or this group that has this body form? Which is homologous? Huh? Anybody? It's one or the other. Okay. This group is homologous. A or B? A, anybody? Homologous. B, this group. Ah, good. You got it. Okay. So these groups share Hox genes because their ancestors, the ancestor of fruit flies and humans, shared these 10 Hox genes. And then humans, later on, evolved a couple more. This is convergent evolution up here, because although they look similar, ichthyosaurs and mammals are not similar. Okay? One's a reptile and one's a mammal. They evolved hundreds of millions of years apart. Okay. Now, vestigial traits. These are structures or relics that used to have a certain function that no longer do. This is a snake, okay? And you can actually see the various bones. There's a rib, femur, fibula. Remember those homologous bones for arms and legs? Phalanges, metacarpals, all that kind of stuff. And you can actually see them in these the skeleton of a snake. These are the remnants of what used to be an ancestor that had legs. Okay, so this indicates that snakes, their most common ancestor actually had legs. It was a lizard of some sort. And in fact, all true snakes descended. It was one time that where those legs and arms were lost. Okay, and then all subsequent snakes inherited that loss, and they don't have limbs anymore. Okay. Human tailbone. Right? Now, we used to share a common ancestor with what we nowadays call monkeys, including baboons, howler monkeys, not lemurs and things like that. They have a tail too, but we'll just say those. Now, all the apes, including humans, lost their tail. Now, I'm going to tell you something kind of personal. I always knew that there was something missing in my life. I didn't know what it was. I just felt like there was something that I should have that I didn't. And I searched for it. I read, about philosophy, religion, and I went to shrinks. I just felt something was really major was missing in my life. And then I suddenly realized when I started looking at evolutionary biology, I know what I'm missing. I'm missing a tail. Okay? A tail. I swear to God, a real tail. In fact, it turns out there are some people who are actually born with a tail nowadays. We still have the genes for a tail, but they've been shut off in apes. But our ancestors had tails. Not only that, my tail, I just know it, was prehensile. In other words, I could grab things with it. Like I'd be walking along and I'd stick it under someone's dress. Oh, sorry. Right? I would be cool. Well, never mind. I'm already fired. Okay. So, that's what I'm missing. Maybe you feel the same way now, and you suddenly understand why you feel like there's something missing. Some of you might feel compunction to play like pin the tail on the donkey all the time. Anybody in here want to just play pin the tail on the donkey all the time? Okay, well, it's your loss. Okay, also, humans are generally hairless, right? But, so we have goosebumps because our ancestors, chimpanzees, have hair, and they can use these structures to raise their hair to make themselves look bigger. Okay. Occasionally, some humans are born completely hairy. It turns out during development there's this light coat of hair in fetuses that are completely covered in this very light coat of hair called lunago. Okay? It's something that's a vestigial trait that gets lost. Some humans, like the ones with the tail, they have a gene and it doesn't shut off their hair, and they are born completely hairy. It's actually called werewolf syndrome. Okay? Like right there. Anybody in here who howls at the moon? Anybody? Right? You don't want to. Anybody ever do that? You're kidding. No one has ever actually howled at the moon. Well, you're going to do it right now. Everybody stand up. Come on. Come on. Up. Yep. Up. I'm going to count who does it or who doesn't. Everybody get up. Up. It's going to make you feel great. Everybody up. Okay. Now, if only me does it, I'll feel lonely, but I know you're going to help me out. Right? Come on. Okay. Follow me. There's a big moon. You're going to get all hairy. Come on. Loser. Okay, see you next week.